Okay, today is Friday, May the 6th, 2022, and I'm giving you this recording for week 6 so that you'll be able to get a jump start on it. I'm going to go over the details and information of the assignments that are due for week 6. I do remind you to please make sure that you follow the rubrics and listen to my remarks and comments. Citing court cases, official court cases, is critical, as you already know. I talk about it all the time from day one. So let's go ahead and get started. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay. So let's look at the grade book so we can see where we are. I've completed grading assignments 1 to 4, and if there are some people that still turn them in late that I still got, you can do it. I mean, I will check them, but you can't turn in weeks 1, 2, or 3 anymore. And then actually, if you do week number 4, you're going to be exceptionally late because you will have missed 5 days. That is Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and then Friday. So you'll lose 50% of the grade right off the bat. All right. So let's go to the calendar for one last time for the course. And you'll see that today's lecture is the week 6. And that for week 6, your assignments are due on the 10th when the course ends. So that means all posts, initial posts, reply posts, your written assignment, and your key phrase will be due for by 11:59 p.m. Central Standard Time. Since the course ends on that date, the T2 starts. In term 2, I'll be teaching drugs and crime and business law, not business law, but in constitutional law again. And then your final grades for this term will be completed by the 13th, which is a week from today. All right. All right, let's go in and let's take a look at the final. Did I post the? Nope, I didn't post the announcement. So let me get out of this and let me post the announcement. Okay, give me a minute. All right, let's go back and hang in there while I get that. Week 6 announcement. Okay. And let me pull it up and then I'm going to let you see it. Okay. Here we go. So let me put this up for you before I share it with you. All right. Okay. So I'm doing it early. Okay. Officially ends Tuesday. Whoops. Okay. And let's schedule it for right now. Okay. So now let me share my screen now again. Okay, there it is. All right, so now you can see it. So for this week, correctional philosophies will be included. This will be kind of a refresher for those of you who took corrections already with me. And we're going to talk about sentencing and correctional philosophies, evidence-based correctional practices, and best practices. Of course, the lecture is today. It's at 7, but I'm doing it actually a little earlier, so you'll have it by 7. Be sure to participate in the discussion assignment rehabilitation improvements. Note the initial post and reply post are due this Tuesday. That will be May the 10th. And then complete the written assignment rehabilitation, which is also due Tuesday, May the 10th. And be sure you follow the requirements that I share and what are under Blackboard and the rubric, essential. Otherwise, you'll lose a lot of points. So the course actually ends, again, for the final time saying this, Tuesday, May 10th at 11:59 p.m. Central Standard Time. And then if you can complete the evaluation, I appreciate that. Remember, you're going to finish strong. And remember my motto, adversity is the springboard to success. All right, so let's get out of the announcement. And let's get to the course materials. So let's first talk about the assignment that's due Tuesday. So it says that some people think it's impossible to rehabilitate an offender and make them into a productive citizen within the confines of a prison. But that's not true because evidence-based practices prove that this can be accomplished. And we talked about this in that course. So what you're going to do is you're going to, one, conduct research using the resource from this module as well as the library to look at current techniques that are used to treat mental illness, addiction, lack of education, and other programs within the prison system. I'll be talking about those. And two, if possible, conduct a personal interview. I'm not going to require that. I am not going to require that unless you're able to do it, but don't worry about it. And if you do conduct the interview, make sure you cite the information appropriately in the body of the paper. All right. And then three, develop 2 additional methods by which you think rehabilitation could be accomplished. So you're going to have a 2-page to 3-page paper, 2-page minimum. That means 2 pages double space with citations in the body and reference page at the end, along with the cover page. So discuss the current techniques used by the prison you contacted or researched. So you can research a prison without talking to someone, and then provide 2 additional ideas to deal with rehabilitation. You should be well aware of that by the end of this lecture, and if you remember the things we talked about in Introduction to Corrections. And based on your current techniques that are used to deal with people with mental illnesses, people who are addicted, lack of education, and other problems, be sure that the procedural practice you propose are feasible and don't require an increase in funding or corrections. Provide APA formatted citation. So the name of the person interviewed, if you did, the corrections facility that you are considering, if you didn't, in addition, as well as other sources you used. Be sure you include, as I said, in-text citations and reference page. And that's APA formatted, and the document should be in the form of a Word document. Very important. All right. Let's look at the grading rubric, which kind of elaborates on what I just said. Remember, if you don't have citations, you're going to have unclear examination, unclear discussion, unclear discussion. So what you want to do is have clear and comprehensive examination of the techniques that you use. Provide credible sources, citations, clear and comprehensive discussion, citations, reference page, clear and comprehensive, 2 additional ideas. That's it. So if you concentrate on this column and pay attention to the fact that the things that we are asking there, you will end up with a good grade in this assignment. All right. If you have questions, feel free to reach out to me, but I think it's pretty clear. At this junction, don't email, text, or either call, because time's running out. All right. And then your discussion assignment for the final time is that says prisons vary depending on the area that you serve. And then you're going to look at these 2 prisons, St. Cloud and Philadelphia. Okay, review the demographics below for the systems of St. Cloud and Philadelphia. Compare and contrast the differences and provide at least 2 constructive suggestions that could help improve your efforts to rehabilitate. Be sure to reference the name of the institution that you're citing and provide the information sources. Then in your reply post, you reply to one of your colleagues. Okay. Again, this is due on Tuesday. Then your live classroom recording. You'll have the link of this recording that will be placed here that you'll be able to use, and I'll email it to you as well. And then your live classroom phrase that I give you, you will be able to. So we're going to talk about these 3 areas: sentencing and correctional philosophies, evidence-based correctional practices, and best practices. All right. So as you know already, that I am a fan of these 4 philosophies relating to practices in correction. The first one is my favorite, and it's actually the one that many agencies are moving toward, that rehabilitation. Not as much retribution, deterrence, and incapacitation. All right. And so the point of the matter is that we want to utilize a philosophy that will reduce recidivism, individuals returning back to be incarcerated. Because as you already know, it's expensive to incarcerate an individual. And so in terms of considering the philosophies, it's important to look at the economics, look at what caused individuals to end up in the institution in the first place. And as we say, rehabilitative efforts seek to change the thinking pattern so that they won't reoffend. Now remember how I work this. Remember the clock. At 12 o'clock, that's where you come in and you've gotten into trouble. And from day one, the correction services should use a philosophy to move the person closer to 6 or have them do a 180. So what happens is they begin to move from 12 to 1 and then 2. And then when they get to 3 o'clock, you can see where you came from and you can see where you have to go. But then you continue moving forward onto 4, onto 5, all the way down to 6. That's where you're going to stop and grow. If you go to the left, you're going to be heading back to the same situation, and it'll be worse the second time. So the point of the matter is that we're going to talk about things that help individuals get from 12 o'clock to 6 o'clock, where they can become productive citizens and not create a problem. Okay, so it says during the first 70 years of the 20th century, we started to look at rehabilitation, and it was pretty clear that individuals released would be better off if they were rehabilitated. It says here, correction officials focus on treating the individual offender to ensure that the treatment met the needs of the individual, and when released, they would be productive and showing improvement. And so it says the philosophy at that time was that the criminal behavior occurred because of harsh slum environmental conditions under which some people were raised, as to a great contributing factor. That could be, that it's not always the case, as I'm one of the examples that didn't end up that way, but I was in those kind of situations. The dysfunctional environment I was involved in being one of those, where there's some damages psychologically to individuals and made it harder. So the key thing is that we want to try to rehabilitate and not be vengeful in our system or seek punishment as an alternative way to deal with individuals in corrections, because all that really does is it probably makes them more into a criminal. I have often said that one of the places that individuals learn to be criminals is prison, because you have individuals who are lifers there and they will feed off of those individuals who are not. And also the individuals who go in who either are not guilty, as they find out later, and were wrongfully incarcerated, they pick up the habits of those inmates that there in order to survive. And so therefore when they come out, they have more problems, because the fact that they're going to come back in a way of being vengeful, and will end up ultimately either getting killed or either back with incarceration. So we call those recidivists. And so begin to recognize
grants like the Pell Grant, providing funds to allow inmates to complete their college education while in prison, because it's been determined clearly that when a person is incarcerated, if they come out with a college education, then they generally do go into a new direction, especially not violent offenders. Now, that's going to be very important for some people. It is not going to be very important alone for individuals who have substance abuse issues, whether it's drugs or alcohol. And so when individuals are put out on probation and other programs, the key thing is that what we have to make sure is that there's some treatment that those individuals receive. Okay. And so one of the issues, though, is funding these programs. If you don't have the programs funded, you can't provide the services that are necessary, and therefore you have individuals. Keep in mind that when you have somebody behind bars, it doesn't deter them from committing crimes even while they're there, but it also doesn't deter them from committing crimes after they are released, because that's what they know. And it's going to be enhanced by what I told you earlier from the exposure that they have while in prison, and they're going to be even more of a criminal. So it's a problem. So people look at the problems that occurred early on, like in the 60s, where individual rights were the big thing, and mandatory rehabilitative treatment, educational training um, um, was provided. So some people didn't like the idea of rehabilitation, and people felt too, some, that individuals were being rewarded for going to prison. But that wasn't really the goal. The goal was to give them a new way of life, i.e., taking them from 12 o'clock down to 6 o'clock so that they can grow and grow in that area here. Okay. So in the 60s, there was unrest, disturbances, and then came the 70s, where crime control came about, and there was an emphasis on curbing violence and criminal activity. So because there were problems with the individuals trusting in the government, people began to dislike mandatory rehabilitation. And the mandatory rehabilitation that was taking place would be something that people would get offended and would not, I repeat, would not be very successful. And so we reached a stage where individuals were placed in situations where now the judges can no longer consider the offender standing before them, and that came before them with dysfunctional issues, antisocial behavior. So the judges had to follow guidelines that were provided across the board to everyone to try to bring some parity. Okay. And ultimately, individuals, you had more incarceration and lack of rehabilitation. And this was without programs now, remember. So you lock them up, you try to help them, but you didn't necessarily operate on what we might consider as restorative justice. Restorative justice is where we try to bring the person to a new mindset,
a new direction in life. So before we got serious about the evidence-based things that we learned that could help them, and we'll talk about those in specific. I mentioned them already, but we'll elaborate more in the next section, where it says that the punishment should fit the crime. So the crime rates looked at the lengthy prison terms as a way of determining crime and restoring peace, but that's the wrong approach. That's the wrong approach. Okay, so now let's move on to where we look at the evidence-based correctional facilities that we realize would really operate really well. And so what we wanted to do is make sure, first of all, that the prisons began the rehabilitation process as soon as the prisoner arrives and all the way until they leave. And so we began to use what we call evidence-based practices. In other words, specific ways of meeting the needs of the individual and to get them actually rehabilitated. And also the result would be increased public safety because the individuals would be released and really no longer have a taste or desire to be criminals. And so correction officers to wardens team up to deal with the goal of rehabilitation. Now, that is also the reason why earlier guards or either correction officers could have high school diplomas. But now many agencies are requiring at least an associate's to a bachelor's degree. So because the more educated the correction officers were, the more productive they could be, because you had to do things like operate as a counselor. You know, you had to facilitate social services. You weren't just locking the prisoners up and then when they maxed out in their time, then you let them go. So as it says here in this bold typing, pretty much what I've been saying, current expectations are now that prisons must prepare inmates to return to society and not reoffend, or as I said earlier, be a recidivist. Okay. So the individuals working in the facility with the help of the National Institute of Correction began to research and come up with some bases that can be applied to help the individual. And there are best practices, which we're going to be talking about in the next section. But the key thing is to redirect the thinking of the individual, okay? Now, one of the first approaches, and now it's being used on the federal level, but in the state, is seeing what the needs are and recognizing what is it that brought the individual there. And they look at the total criminal history of the individual to see also if there was any, excuse me, substance abuse. And you know that from drugs and crime and from corrections, that if an individual has substance abuse issues, whether it's alcohol or drugs, that you have to make sure that you address that issue to help those individuals, because you can educate them, but if you don't address the problem that's involved there, and then you also are going to have
not just substance abuse. You're going to have more and more individuals who have mental illnesses, and those must be addressed. So it is clear that, as I said earlier, that education helps individuals to make them less likely to recidivate. And so the focus is on educational needs of inmates, providing opportunities for programs so that individuals can receive their general education diploma or GED and or their high school diploma. And then moving further, individuals participate in programs that could get them into college, helping individuals to learn to read, because you'll be surprised how many. That's one of the major issues: read and write, basic skills. And so ultimately, the key thing is to increase the interest in education, replacing an interest in crime. So it talks about the Federal Prison Initiative job training program. There are some individuals who operate not just with education, college, but want to operate on the basis of trades. So now we have people who go in, they can become barbers, beauticians, nail technicians. They can actually become individuals who get IT, information technology training, and learn how to do those kind of things to make a good living. Auto mechanics, carpenters, the sky is the limit. Artists, and then a lot. So the Pell Grant um, we provided monies for completing the education. But in '94, because there was a rising crime rate that was taking place, the Violent Crime and Control Law Enforcement Act began to say, wait a minute, are we really wasting money? You know, there's a high rate of recidivism. But one of the things that, and so the Pell Grant was discontinued, and new educational initiatives were being provided. And one of the key things is, in addition to the education, we began to recognize that you have to have the issue of mental health disorders as well as substance abuse orders addressed as well. So it talks about the fact that residential drug abuse program is key, people. As I say in teaching drugs and crime, the name of the course is Drugs and Crime, not Crime and Drugs. And the reason why it's drugs and crime is because individuals commit crimes to support their drug habits. They're not really bad people, but they're addicts who are controlled by that monkey, as they call it, on their back, which caused them to do any and everything to get those drugs. And so the residential drug abuse programs uh, is an attempt to address that issue. And it takes some time. As you recall, in drugs and crime, you know, we got the heroin epidemic, opioid, you know, and so we have to make sure that individuals get intensive help. Outpatient things generally don't work very well, but begin to start to work it while they're incarcerated, so that when they do get released on parole, or they end up on probation rather than going to jail, that there is some help there. begin to focus on family ties and more visitation. And it's been established that when families are connected to individuals who are incarcerated, it begins to change their thinking, and they feel like they're not a throwaway. Now, this does not necessarily apply to a crime family, but you know what I'm talking about. Everybody in there, and most people in there, are not crime families. And so the individuals are allowed to see their children, and in some facilities, you have conjugal visits if a person is married. And so those kind of things take place. And so the key thing is to encourage and strengthen the family ties. So it says here that the Bureau of Prisons and the federal level are required to hold at least one family unification event per year. And so the more the contact is with the family, the decrease in recidivism could be the result. Another effort is residential reentry centers, also called halfway houses, where it says over 80% of released federal inmates go through these houses, and those must have standards. And so now some of the states are starting to do those as well. Finally, inmates, as they exit being incarcerated, there is help for them to get second chance jobs, housing, and again, of course, like I said, to go to school. In order to do this, you'd be surprised how many individuals never had a Social Security card, never have seen their birth certificate, never had either a driver's license or either a state ID card, because you have to have identification in order to do the things such as employment, education, register in school, and to obtain a place to live. So the Bureau of Prisons on the federal level covers the cost to ensure that the inmate has some help there, because it might seem like a little amount of money that you pay, but if you don't have any of that, it's like a tremendous mountain that has to be climbed. So oftentimes that's done. So now that's being worked out on the state as well as the federal level. Okay, so these are some of the evidence-based correctional practices that we talk about. So let's conclude by talking about the best practices. So the best practice is that what we want to do is utilize these evidence-based things that I've talked about: the drug program, the education program, the vocational program, providing assistance to help people get documentation, all across the full spectrum. And the individuals in these facilities, let's say they use California as an example of an organization that has applied best practices for more rehabilitative results or rehabilitative policies, and rehabilitative policies do prevent or at least reduce recidivism. So in California, as the example to look at here, it provides the most effective prison rehabilitation program that is evidence-based, evaluated for cost effectiveness, and modeled for the highest risk and highest need. So what you want to do is meet the individual at the real problem. You don't operate on a peripheral. You go right to the heart of the matter that got them there in the first place. And like I said, I submit that you're going to find a tremendous number of individuals who have substance abuse problems and or mental health issues, or both, but you can't address one without the other. So you've got to operate on the full basis. But there are some issues that deal with the issue of rehabilitation. And some of the challenges are the correctional institution falls short in dealing with the three key principles for reducing recidivism. That is dealing with the education, the health, and substance abuse. 2, does not effectively use all of their programs. 3, has a flawed approach to the performance of the programs. Remember, it's not going to happen overnight. And so these things create issues dealing with the evidence-based practices and whether they're working or not. Again, remember, it's not automatic. It's not an overnight thing. It's not like flicking the switch and it continues to operate. And so it takes a lot of hard work, a lot of consistent work with the individuals, a lot of patience, and those kinds of things. So it says to correct the challenges, there have been recommendations from the legislative side of things where laws are passed, and to work on funding. If there's no funding, you can't get off the ground. And so it says here that the correctional facility must show which programs are evidence-based and that the program must be regularly executed. So as I said, it must be consistent to reduce recidivism. Independent searchers continue to reevaluate the cost of programs that the inmates need, and see how individuals have completed them and their likelihood of recidivism. 3, committee is should be put in place to review which offenders are considered highest risk and need, and how the program will address those specific needs. Remember, once again, you have to get to the heart of what brought that individual there in the first place. Correctional facilities must improve the use of their current rehabilitative programs so that they can maximize the benefits and not just say, oh, it's not working. Let's look at why it's not working. Let's do what we need to do to change that approach. And so the individuals who work in the entity, the prison or the correction facility, work to the process of coming up with ideas to help to decrease recidivism. And 4, correctional facilities, it must improve the use of rehabilitation programs so they can get the max out of it. And 5, finally, improve performance measures by requiring consistent, remember I said that earlier, of all programs, all rehabilitation programs. And so it says California prison inmates reoffend at an alarming rate. 43% who are released will reoffend within 3 years. And it makes it important that they look at evidence-based practices. Think about that in terms of your state as well. So one of the things that you look at is the risk to recognize the criminogenic factors. In other words, the factors that contribute. And so you look at antisocial behavior of the individual, what caused them to arrive at that, their personality, their relationships, looking at their minds, criminal thinking. I just use a quote from the Bible, so a man thinketh, so is he. And their actions come out in that as well. Poor connections with the family. There is no family ties. low to poor school or work performance because individuals have issues that are not addressed. Did you not know that there are some people who have not mental health, but they have physical conditions that give them problems with reading and writing, such as dyslexia or other illnesses that need to be addressed. Problems, again, finally, with drugs and alcohol. Again, I can't stress how important that would be, because if we got a hold on that, I believe in my heart that there would be higher rates of rehabilitation and lower rates of recidivism. So let's conclude with recognizing that rehabilitation is, as it says here, a win-win situation. Society is better protected, the crime rates decrease, and the states have money due to decreasing prison populations. So money can be used more for education and other programs. And it'll take people getting jobs and working so that they don't increase the public aid rolls as well. So the key thing is that, as it says here in the final statement, one of the advantages to inmate rehabilitation cannot be measured in dollar amounts, but in the safety of the inmate and correction officer population, as is education, how inmates are treated. As I tell my students, treat the individual, I don't care what kind of person they are, with dignity and respect. And as a result, you will find a situation where individuals are going to respond, and overall, society will benefit and everybody will end up in a better situation. Okay? So, again, the best practices, those are what we just covered a few minutes ago. Okay, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. And so I'm going to give you a key phrase, which you should be able to remember. I've used it before, but I'll use it here because this is what the whole topic of chapter 6 is all about. And that's rehabilitation. If you're listening to the lecture, you can probably predict he's going to say something about rehabilitation. Absolutely. So give me rehabilitation as your word to get your points. And remember, it's due by Sunday. Well, I've enjoyed teaching this class. Again, I remind you, it's a survey course. It prepares you, and many of you are about to receive your associate's degree. And hopefully I'll see many of you on the other side in the bachelor's program, where I teach several classes. One of the main ones is constitutional law that I'm teaching this term, and I'm teaching it next term, starting Wednesday. So if you have any questions or concerns or issues, feel free to reach out to me. If I can do anything to help you even after the class, feel free to reach out to me. Any questions or concerns, I wish you the best. And let's see where we go from here. All right, so enjoy the rest of your day and stay safe and take care of yourself. Good night.